Hello and welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. My guest today is Chris Sims. He was our first guest. He's here for the 5th time. Chris, welcome back to Comic Culture.
5 times. 5 times I've been here. Number 1, number 5. And let me tell you something, Touchdown. This is my 5th time here. This is the one where I keep it real. This is the all bets are off, no holds barred interview just for you and the fine people here at my second home, UNC Pembroke.
Well, I'm glad we're finally going to get the real instead of the, polished and fake.
It's all been, not fake. Not fake. How dare you use that word around me? But no, it's like, I'm ready. I'm ready. What are we going to talk about today?
So how about we talk about what you've been up to since the last time you were here.
Okay.
And one of them is you worked with Rob Liefeld on Deadpool, Bad Blood.
Good research.
Wasn't that?
Check the cover.
Yeah. So tell us what it was like working with the creator of the character on a book around the time when everyone is talking about Deadpool.
It was fantastic. Chad Bowers, who's my co-writer on everything we're going to be talking about today, we've been writing together for 10 years as of 2018. We're both, kids who were like, when Deadpool first showed up in Marvel Comics, I was 9, Chad was like 13. So we were like the perfect age to be big Rob Liefeld fans. And, over the course of my career writing about comics online, like I did the thing that a lot of people do. Like I'm like, Rob, those are bad old comics. And then I had like a very public coming around on Rob, where I love him. Like going back and reading that stuff as an adult, as a guy in my 30s, late 20s when I went back and read them, those books are amazing. They're like so energetic. They're like high octane. They're exactly what comics fans wanted at the time, like whether you agree with them or not. And it was a big shift in how comics were made. And Rob represents a lot of that. Working with him was amazing. He's incredibly smart. He knows exactly what he's doing. I think the thing people forget about Rob is that he's been like a top level, like A+ comics creator for 25 years. Like he's been a guy who could do anything you wanted for 2.5 decades. So yeah, learning from him and working with him and seeing how he paces stuff out, for me personally, it was not just a dream come true, but like very educational. And I know Chad feels the same way. Chad's doing Youngblood now, which is another Rob creation that he's doing on his own at Image, which is legitimately like my favorite book coming out right now. It is Grant Morrison in the 90s good. And as a reader, I just love getting that every month. But yeah, Bad Blood was amazing, and we finally got to meet Rob at the NC Comic-Con Bull City, which is in Durham, and just having dinner with him and getting all these stories about what it was like to be making comics in '91, like what the formation of Image was like. He is a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of experience, and it really is like getting to work alongside somebody who legitimately one of the masters.
And you talk about the energy, you talk about his reputation a little bit, and I think he's one of those creators that, we kind of look at the 90s, we say, oh look, they've got 5 pockets and all this other sort of stuff, but he was the one who really created that aesthetic, and when we look back at it, it's sort of like looking at Kirby's work in the 70s, where it might not have been as appreciated, as the years went on, but when you look back at it.
I feel the same way. Like I used to think in the late 90s when I was first getting into like comics internet and like message boards, I remember people saying that like Rob Liefeld was like the Kirby of the 90s. And even then, when I was just really, coming to an understanding of who Jack Kirby was and what he did, the co-creator of the Marvel Universe, like I thought that was a wild thing to say. And then I get it now. Because you talk about Kirby in the 70s, which is not a Jack Kirby a lot of people like. Like a lot of people will point to the 60s work, like Fantastic Four, or even some of his later stuff, like with the Hunger Dogs graphic novel. But for me, like that 1971 to 1978, like New Gods, Jimmy Olsen, Commandy, The Demon, Black Panther, his return to Captain America, which is one of the best runs ever. That's all the Kirby stuff that I love. I think it's pound for pound, like better even than Fantastic Four, with the exception of maybe 5 of the best comics ever printed in that Fantastic Four run. But I think Rob has a claim on being one of those guys. Like without Rob, a lot doesn't happen. Just for Image, just for the X-Men franchise. Without guys like Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee, Jim Valentino, who was making Guardians of the Galaxy, like the original Guardians of the Galaxy, top-selling book. Like, those guys were all like the important creators of the time. And so again, like going from me being a 10-year-old going to the comic book store and seeing Youngblood on the rack, seeing X-Force, to at 34, 35, like working with Rob and seeing how he does it, it's really amazing. Like it's not quite working with Kirby, but for me it was close.
So is it something where you collaborate on the story idea, or do you come with the story and Marvel's like, well, guess who's going to be drawing it?
Well, actually, how it happened was I was talking to our editor at the time on a book called X-Men '92, which was the thing I was here to talk about last when I was back here in like 2015. And Jordan, who's our editor, was talking to me, and he was like, hey, you and Chad, you guys like Rob, right? And I'm like, yes, we like Rob. Like, Rob's great. And I didn't even know why he was asking. But he knew that Rob wanted to come back to Marvel, do a big Deadpool project. Like, this was when the movie was, this was before the movie was released. So they knew, they had seen the movie. They knew it was going to be a big thing. Because, I mean, geez, you just need to look at people's T-shirts to see how big that movie was. But they knew Rob wanted to come back and do a big thing. And this would have been, I think originally the plan was to do it release it in late 2016. Which would have been, I think, coincided with the 25th anniversary of Deadpool. It ended up coming out in May of 2017. But yeah, like when he was like, hey, do you want to do a Deadpool, like the first ever Deadpool original graphic novel with Rob Liefeld? Yes, obviously, like that is not an offer that you think twice about. Not for me and Chad. So what happened was we got on the phone. And talked to Rob for the first time, and he had some stuff that he definitely wanted to do. Like he wanted to introduce this big villain. He had an opening sequence in mind. So if you read the opening of Bad Blood, that whole scene with Deadpool on the rooftop, that was some Rob stuff that really came in. But we plotted it all together, and we not only plotted this one. Rob's currently working on a sequel called Batter Blood, which I'm very excited about. We're hoping to make it a trilogy. You can probably guess what the third one's going to be called. But we plotted out enough with this character, who's this guy you see over here on the cover. His name's Thumper. We plotted enough with him that we could do like 3 big Deadpool stories based on that. And then, Rob drew 100 pages, and then Chad and I went through with the plot that we'd done and with notes from Rob and with stuff that we'd come up with, and we wrote the script. We did the dialogue. So
it was kind of like that classic Marvel style where you collaborate on the idea and then you get the pages and sort of react to them.
Yeah, exactly. And that made a lot of sense for this project. It's generally speaking, that's not my favorite way to work. I am very script oriented as a writer. Like I will write, page 1, panel 1, dialogue, and just go start to finish on a script. And then I'll go back and revise and change things and see what needs to be done. But I like to have it all on that front first. Chad's a little different. Chad likes to do like page breakdowns and then go back in and fill the dialogue later once he sees the art. We once had a conversation, and I was like, how can you write the next panel if you don't know what people are saying? And he was like, how do you know what people are saying if you can't see what they're doing? But with Bad Blood, I'd like to think that we did a lot of really good work. We did Downset Fight in 2014. That was an award winner, won the Texas Library Association Award. We did X-Men '92, which was got a really good response from the fans. We've done some good stuff since, but I don't think anybody went into Bad Blood thinking that we were the stars.
Right.
It's the big deal is that it's Rob Liefeld, the creator of Deadpool, 100 new pages, hardcover for the first time. So for us, I think it was important to not get in the way. Let Rob do the thing that people are there to see. Let him go wild on the page and come back to Deadpool in a big way. And then we got to go in and write the jokes. Chad wrote some of my favorite panels we've ever done. Like there's I think my single favorite line in the book is one of Chad's. It's a flashback to the early days of X-Force, and Cable's pointing at this tower that's in the distance. And it's this big tower, like this 40-story tower out in the middle of nowhere. And Cable goes, there it is, the MLF secret weapons facility. I'm like, yeah, they don't make a lot of 40-foot secret buildings or 40-story secret buildings, but that was a really fun thing to put in there and try and capture the spirit of those comics we liked when we were kids.
So you and Chad, when you work on some. I guess there's an element of humor in your writing. Downset Fight was about a former football player who sort of becomes famous for fighting mascots. And your work on X-Men '92 was an homage to the classic animated series, but also the tropes that Claremont was using in the in canon X-Men books.
Yeah, the thing I like to say about '92 is that it's Chad says it's based on the era. It's based on when you get those old comics and there's ads for X-Men pasta, X-Men Pogs, X-Men underwear, X-Men action figures, everything. The X-Men were everywhere in the '90s, and I always think about these 4 comics that you could get at Pizza Hut. So if you went in and ordered a large pizza, they would give you part 1 of this 4-part X-Men story, and so that's kind of the feeling that we're trying to recreate in that book. But yeah, like it's obviously like going to lend itself to a little bit of bringing back those big broad stroke highlights of the era. Like Storm never ends a sentence without an exclamation point in our run. I don't think, not once.
So having this reputation of being able to do action adventure, superheroics, and humor, I guess that makes you and Chad sort of the perfect fit for a book like Deadpool, because he's the the merc with a mouth.
Yeah. One of the first things Rob told us when we got on the phone, and I was really surprised, because Deadpool, created in '91, hung around for a while, was like instantly like a fan favorite character, but then there was the Joe Kelly and Ed McGuinness run in the mid to late '90s that was very critically acclaimed, very much beloved by fans, but it was kind of always on the verge of getting canceled, and that really brought in a lot of the humor and a lot of like the human element, and then since 2005, he's been one of Marvel's biggest characters, so he's been everywhere. And there's been hard R-rated, like blood and guts Deadpool stories. There's been comedy stories. There's been space stories. There's been, more serious stories where he gets into some very issues of morality. And then there's the movie, obviously, which touches on a lot of stuff. Like, he's a very sympathetic character, but he's also very, very funny. And one of the first things Rob told us, I think maybe the first thing he said when we started working on the book, was that there's a Deadpool for everybody. And I was worried that he was going to be like, no, I want this, I want my Deadpool back. But he was like, yeah, there's a Deadpool for everybody. And there's people who like Rob Liefeld, but there's also people who like Deadpool. There's probably also going to be people who like Chris and Chad. And so our goal with this book was to make a Deadpool that would satisfy people who like the jokes, people who like the Joe Kelly stuff, people who like the Fabian Nicieza stuff, people who like the Cullen Bunn stuff and the Jerry Duggan stuff. And that's an incredible roster of creators to try and live up to. The Gail Simone run was a big touchstone for me when she was on Deadpool and then Agent X. So trying to go into it and balance all that, it's tough. Because you don't want it to be too funny, because that takes away from the action. You don't want it to be too action-packed, because that takes away from what people want to see with Deadpool being a Joker and a Weisenheimer, wisecracking the merc with a mouth. So at the end of the day, the solution I think we hit on was everyone around him is always playing it straight. Everyone around him is like a very when Cable shows up, like Cable's ultra serious, but in a way that makes him a very easy character to react to. So I think that let us be true to the character when we were going in and writing the script, and plus we had 100 great pages of art to work with.
You and Chad have also started working on another unlikely property, which
Seems like everything we do is unlikely properties, honestly.
And it's funny, because what I've noticed is that when you're working on something that no one's expecting, period, you always manage to be successful in putting out a book that's both enjoyable, thought-provoking, and the readers enjoy, which I guess would be enjoyable. But I like to repeat myself, especially when I'm redundant. But you did a book, Atari's Swordquest, and I'm just wondering, this is going back to those Atari cartridges in the 1980s. Is this related to those mini comics that were in the book?
Yes and no. Here's the thing. Dynamite came to us and asked us if we wanted to do an Atari comic. And we, of course, said yes. At the time, we were wrapping up X-Men '92. We were kind of getting to the point where we were going to be done with Deadpool pretty soon. We didn't know what we were going to have next as far as Marvel or any of our other work. So, we were looking for a new project. They were like, do you want to do something with Atari? We said, sure. They sent us a 3-page single-space list of every property that Atari owns. So, not Donkey Kong, not Pac-Man, but every first party game that Atari put out for the 2600 or the 5600 or whatever was on that list. And we basically just went through it and picked out names that sounded interesting because, you know, a lot of those early Atari games were stuff like Blackjack or Super Baseball. And I'd like to think we could do a comic called Super Baseball. It seems like it writes itself. But we picked out titles that we liked. There's one game called Night Driver. And it's just a driving game, and it takes place at night because you don't have to do as much graphics if it's dark. But Swordquest was one that stuck out because we've been talking about doing a fantasy comic for a while. And we pulled that one out. I'd heard of Adventure, but Swordquest was one that I'd never heard of. And when I started looking into it, and when Chad started looking into it, and we saw that there were existing comics, and there was an interesting real-world hook to it, in that there was this big contest associated with the games that never finished in the 80s, that was the one that we wanted to do. Now, again, we'd never heard of it before we got that list. And I'm pretty, you know, knowledgeable about video games and video game history, but for some reason I missed that one, probably because it wasn't a Nintendo game. Come to find out, like, a lot of people are really interested in, like, in retro gaming circles, interested in this contest and interested in how this game was put together. So we got to play with a lot of the stuff. The comics are an element of it, and we had a debate, Chad and I, over whether we were going to do a straight in-universe fantasy comic, updating those original comics, or whether we wanted to use them and kind of do, you know, like a sequel, like 30 years later, or if we wanted to do something else. And we ended up with something that's a little different, but still kind of plays with a lot of those ideas. And that was really fun to do, especially since we got the team from Downset Fight, you know, our first graphic novel. We got Ghost Rider X with the artist on that. Josh came back to do the lettering. And Atari was a really hands-off licensor. I loved our editors at Dynamite. Kevin Kettner was our editor on Swordquest. And he was always willing to fight for us to do the stuff we wanted to do. Like have a book with 4 main characters where 3 of them are like very early established as being queer. That was a thing we wanted to do very early on. And that might be a hard sell for other publishers. And Kevin was like, hey, I'll fight for this if you guys want to do it. But he didn't have to. Because, you know, Atari was pretty much on board with letting us treat this book like it was a creator-owned book. It's not, of course, but it's something that I think I'm more proud of than anything else we've done because of the way it came together, because we got to tell the story that we wanted to tell that has a lot of layers to it, and it's probably not the story people expect. I feel like it has a lot in common with Downset Fight, the book where a man punches people dressed as bears. But beyond just having the same team attached to it, I think it gets into a lot of like the emotional content that we tried to bring underneath all the comedy and action, which is again something we tried to do with Deadpool. You know, towards the end when we talk about the bad blood of the title is this history that Deadpool and Thumper have. With Swordquest, we put a lot of that history and a lot of that emotion in there, and it really worked out great. I'm super proud of it.
Yeah, you know, the thing is, I haven't had the chance to read it yet because...
Well, it's very good.
I've heard that.
Just give it a read.
I'm going to have to. But what I've been reading on Twitter is people were, one, surprised at how good it was, but then they were talking about how it was one of the best books of the year and whatnot. So it's out now in a trade form, so people could pick this up at their local booksellers.
Yeah, we've got a quote on here on the cover from Patton Oswalt, and that's not something that we went to him for. Like, that's just a tweet he sent out one day that we were very surprised to see and very happy. You know, when the star of a Pixar movie throws out a shout out to your book, that's a pretty cool thing. So, you know, he let us use that on the cover. But yeah, like the response to it's been really good. I did a con just recently, and I gave a copy to Teenie Howard, who's a writer that I really respect, and I love her stuff. She does a book called Assassinistas, a book called The Skeptics. She did Magdalena for Top Cow, and she went on Twitter and she was like, "Hey, I just got this book from, you know, I bought it from Chris at the con this weekend. It's great. Like it is, you know, surprisingly just amazing." So that felt good to have somebody, you know, not just, you know, someone who's a comic book fan, but, you know, an actor, a comedian, not just to have someone like that respond really well to it, but have another comics creator that I really respect and admire say that about the book was really great. And, you know, it shouldn't have been surprising to me because, you know, Chad and I talk about our stuff all the time. I mean, he's also a writer that I respect and admire. So I figure if we can hammer something together, it should be good. But it's always nice to get that from someone else.
And it's funny too, because again, this is a property that was sort of open. You could do whatever you want with it. And when you have these oddball properties, you sometimes end up with, and you didn't do this, but the film Battleship, based on the board game. You know, it turned out to be, I believe the polite way to put it is terrible. And yet you're taking something and you're thinking of it in a whole new way, and somehow keeping it in that Atari aesthetic as well, because they had some of the, you know, the great cover art and the old DC books that were thrown in there, because I guess Atari and Warner Brothers were involved.
Well, I don't know what size the truck was that they backed up to DC Comics full of money, but it had to be something, because those original comics were Jerry Conway, Dick Giordano, George Perez, and Roy Thomas, which in 1983 were the hottest creators. Like, that was, George Perez was doing New Teen Titans. You know, Jerry Conway was the second writer of Spider-Man. You know, like Dick Giordano, longtime DC, you know, editor and artist. You know, inked and drew some of your favorite stories. You know, There's No Hope in Crime Alley is a Dick Giordano book. Roy Thomas was a big, you know, again, second editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics, who came over to DC and did some stuff. So that's, you know, a great roster of talent, but it's also one that we didn't want to try and, you know, and peck out a living in their shadow.
Right.
But the fact that Swordquest had this really troubled history in the real world, and that these are games that are about, in the game, trying to acquire this magic sword, the sword of ultimate sorcery. That's going to be the object at the end of the fourth game that you're going to get. Fourth game never comes out. It's also the prize for the real world contest that was going on with Swordquest that involved the comics. So there's a real world version of the thing that you're looking for in the game that A, the thing in the game was never found because that last game never came out, and B, nobody knows where the sword is in the real world. Like, we tried to do research. There are rumors that it was melted down. There's rumors that the Franklin Mint has it. I saw one article that said it hung in the CEO of Atari's office behind his desk for 20 years, but then when he died, it vanished. No one knows where the sword is. So the idea of sending these characters on a real-life sword quest that would mirror the one in the games came really easily, and I think that let us do something that stays true to the original game, but also gets to go in a weird direction that people might not expect, of having, you know, a 45-year-old man decide that that's the thing he wants to do before he dies.
So you mentioned a moment ago about going to conventions, and I'm just wondering, when you go to a convention, it's obviously going to be different than if I'm a fan and I go to a convention. So you know, what are you doing at a convention besides meeting the fans? How are you sort of networking and interacting with folks?
With networking, it's always good to see everybody. You know, like, writing is a very solitary act. Even though I often usually write with a partner, a lot of times I'll go in and write pages in the script, and then he'll go in and edit them, or he'll go in and write pages in the script, and I'll go in and fill in dialogue, and we'll edit each other. But we've done issues where we haven't even talked. You know, we've done issues where maybe we get on the phone for like an hour. And I also write, you know, as my day job. So a lot of times it's just living up here. You know, it's being alone in your own head, which is not great for anybody, to just exist in your own mind all day. And cons let you connect with other people. You know, it's where I see Tinny, and she's relatively local. She's another North Carolina creator, but it's where I see her. It's where I see Jeremy Whitley, who's another North Carolina guy. It's where I see Chad most of the time nowadays, since I no longer live in South Carolina. You get to see these friends that you have and these people that you've met through this industry, and that's just on that side. A con with editors at it can be a really great opportunity. San Diego. The only reason to go to San Diego, if you're a comic book creator, is to talk to editors, because everybody's there to get their photo with TV's Green Arrow and give him $40 and not buy your comics, I guarantee you. But you know, you get to meet editors, you get to like talk about stuff that you want to do, and a lot of that stuff you can handle over email, over phone, over, you know, just reaching out and contacting, and they ask you for a pitch, and you give them a pitch, or you ask if they're interested, and you send something in. But nothing's going to replace that act of sitting down with someone and having a soda, getting to dinner, even just, you know, being in the same room and talking to someone and being like, hey, what if I did this? and then you get to see their instant feedback. Like, you can judge whether someone thinks you're telling them a good idea by their face, and you can't do that in email. You can't adjust on the fly on email. So that part of it's really great. Fans' interactions are 90% of the time really great. People come up and they buy the books. People have come up and told me they really like Swordquest, which, you know, when it's a Marvel title or I assume a DC title, I haven't worked for them, but when it's a big publisher title, you get to get a big reaction. Like, people care about Deadpool. We thought we knew people cared about Jubilee. We thought we cared about Jubilee when we were doing X-Men. There are people who care about Jubilee so much more than we did. And they liked our book, which is great. But they'll tell you if you're doing something that is extant that they care about. I'll tell people if they're writing Batman wrong all day. Fortunately, I haven't had to do that in a while. But with a book like Swordquest, where it's more of an unknown quantity, one of the reasons Patton Oswalt's tweet was so surprising to us is that we don't know who's reading the book. We know it's doing okay, and they're going to let us, you know, finish out the miniseries. They're not telling us, hey, this is selling so badly we have to stop it after 2 issues. But we don't know. You know, it's a much smaller project. So that environment is where you get to see people react to your work, and you can, if they haven't heard of it, you can pitch it to them, and you can show it to them and get their reaction as they look through it. And, you know, maybe they'll go, oh, that's cool, and then they put it down and walk away. But maybe they're interested in it and they want to give you money for it, which is nice. That's always nice. The other 10% of interactions with fans at cons is terrible. I've had a couple rough ones recently. I had a guy come up to the table at the last con we did in Raleigh. And Chad and I got matching banners made because, you know, we spent 10 years writing together. We're always going to have 10 years worth of books that we've done together. We're always going to have Deadpool and Swordquest and Darkhawk. And so we got our banners to match in the style of like G.I. Joe action figures. So, you know, I'm Tomax, he's Zaymot, basically. And a guy comes up to me and he goes, so if the G.I. Joe catchphrase is knowing is half the battle, what's your catchphrase? And I'm like, it's 10 o'clock in the morning. Don't ask me for my catchphrase. So I just go, please buy some comics. And he's like, oh, that's pathetic, and walks away like laughing. And this dude was wearing a pirate hat and a kimono and like plaid capri pants, which is fine, but like that's also like a weird thing to bring in when you're gonna call some other dude that you don't know pathetic. So there's stuff like that, you know. But I think you're gonna run into that. Believe me, I get a lot less of that working in comics than I did when I was working behind the counter of a comic book store. Any retail job, any food service job, you're gonna have those people coming in and being weird at you or being rude at you. And the good interactions with fans, by a massive margin, outweigh those.
Well, Chris, I'm gonna have to stop you there because I'm being told that we are out of time, and I'd like to thank you for being on the show for your 5th time. I'd like to thank you at home for watching Comic Culture. We will see you again soon.